Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Uh, Today is ithought Investor Day, and one of the things that we wanted to celebrate today is you. So this means celebrating your journey as an investor, celebrating your aspirations and the targets that you have set for yourself, and finding ways in which we can get to those aspirations. And the topic that I have chosen to talk about today is essentially harnessing your most powerful asset. So one thing that we noticed is that a lot of people don't actually know what their most powerful asset is. And only if we know what that asset is, can we really use that as a tool to make a big difference in our wealth creation journey. And that's going to be something that we talk about over the next 30 to 45 minutes. And at the end of the webinar, I'll be happy to take any questions or anything that you want to discuss about your own wealth creation journeys. So thank you once again for joining us today. And do remember to celebrate yourself and to celebrate your journey as an investor today. So without further ado, let's get everyone to sort of pitch in and participate in this. Uh, so quickly, just in the chat box, please type in what you think your most powerful asset is. Right? Do you think it's your uh, home? Do you think it's some investments that you've made? Is it your career? So be creative. Just type in some answers as to what you believe your most valuable asset is and what is going to make the biggest difference in your wealth creation journey. Okay, so we have a very interesting answer that says knowledge. Health. For young people, time, career, asset allocation, networks, knowledge, money, time. Okay, so we have a lot of interesting answers that have come in, right? And I would not disagree with any of the answers that have come because primarily you do need health, you do need diversification, you do need network, you do need your career, and all of these things matter. But what I think is the most important asset that we don't even recognize is really ourselves, right? You are your most important asset because you are the one who's going to control all of these things. Um, and the minute you recognize that, you start unlocking some potential that's there for you. So in financial terms, there's something that we call human capital, right? And human capital basically means, okay, what is the financial equivalent of all the income that you will earn through your career over your entire working life, right? And that's an interesting definition to look at. And that's what most people use when they're trying to assess how much life insurance they need. Uh, so this is an interesting definition, but can we actually stretch that definition a little bit more to make it a little bit wholesome, right? So it's not just about the money that you earn during your career. Everyone in this room today is an investor. They are taking their wealth creation journey very seriously. So if you're in that category, then I think what we need to recognize is that your human capital isn't just about the income that you earn. It's also about the wealth that you can create and that you do create over your entire lifetime. And if we start stretching that definition, then we realize that there is a bigger responsibility also at play because you can increase your human capital not by working longer or changing jobs or changing careers, but actually by focusing on wealth creation, right? So now that we've discovered that, let's look at what this human capital is in and where it stands in the investor's balance sheet. So on the asset side of your balance sheet, you have things like human capital, you have your financial assets. So people who said, I want to have a diversified asset allocation strategy, and somebody who mentioned gold as their most important asset, these all come into your financial or physical assets. Then over the course of our lifetime, most of us, or at least some of us, will have something that comes in the way of inheritance from the previous generations, right? Then we look at the liability side of your balance sheet. So the liability side really shows us that our lifestyle expenses, which is basically our day-to-day living costs, as and your financial goals, that is things that you decide to provide for, right? It could be buying a house in your lifetime, it could be settling something for your children or paying for their education and their wedding expenses. It could even be things like funding your own retirement, right? Because that is something, regardless of who we are or where we work, that is something that we all have to do. And finally, any loans that you have would obviously be classified on the liability side. Now, to optimize the balance sheet, there are many things that we can do. The first one we've talked about, you can stretch your human capital, and we'll spend some time through this webinar seeing how you can actually do that. You could optimize your financial assets. So following a multi-asset strategy, making sure your assets are mapped correctly to financial goals, and then choosing a right strategy for those goals, right? That is one thing that we could do. And this works for physical assets as well. And inheritance is something that we need to learn to manage because it's not a given. And at the same time, once it is in your hands, there is a certain responsibility that comes in managing that. When it comes to the liability side of the balance sheet, there are still things that we can do. So how many of us know someone who's put off saving because they feel that their income today, especially if you're a young person, is not enough to save, right? What you notice is that might be true in the first couple of years of your career, but these people, even a few years down the line, 5, 6 years into their career, still struggle with starting to save. And why does this happen? This basically happens because of something that we call lifestyle creep, which is that as your income grows, your expenses also tend to grow, primarily because you're not trying to actively control them, right? So we can optimize our balance sheet by implementing certain strategies that allow us to save more while maintaining a good lifestyle. So this could come in the way of having a budget, or even in a very simple manner, if you are not able to control your expenses. One of the tools that we suggest is that you start saving first. So as soon as your salary gets credited, do an automated investment that can be in the form of an SIP, so that that money gets debited and you manage with the remaining money that's there in your account, right? Uh, our financial goals need to be priorities, right? So what you'll see is sometimes people will come with 10, 12 goals without too much clarity as to what is the most important goal, what are nice to haves, and what are not even real goals, right? So knowing that, having some sense of like, what is my strategic plan, what are the things that are important to me, what are the things that are going to make me feel good when I achieve those goals, these are things that we need to know so that we live happily and that we actually stretch our potential to our maximum ability. So one thing which is very clear is that when assets are still catching up with liabilities, right? So that is when you're growing your wealth and you're trying to meet your financial goals, whether it's for your parents, your children, your own personal aspirations, or your retirement, there's always a plan. There's always a number that we're working towards, and people are motivated to save. So the first step is actually having a strategic plan, because when you see the plan in place, you know exactly where you are in your journey and how much further you have left to go. And if you're able to understand this, and if you're able to visualize this and see that, okay, I am 70% done with goal A, I am 30% done with goal B, and I am 100% provided for goal C, then you have a very clear idea of what your priorities are and how you can channel your energy, your mental time, your mental space, your time, as well as your financial resources towards achieving these goals, right? So that's a very clear part. But what if you have more than what you need, right? Or what if you don't have a plan? Then you really don't know where you stand. And eventually, when it's time to get a plan, you feel a little bit overwhelmed. So, this strategic planning has to actually happen a little bit earlier in your journey as an investor. And the faster you get it done, the more clarity you will have in whatever you pursue or whatever milestone or goal you set for yourself in the future. So I'm going to walk you through a story where we have somebody who's got more than what they need, right? And how does that work out for him? So I'd like you to meet Nikhil, who has always been a conservative investor, and he saved aggressively through every job of his, right? And now he's in his 50s, his children are all well settled abroad, and he doesn't have any other financial commitments because he's ensured that he's educated them, he's ensured that he's set up some money for their wedding expenses. And before he turned 50, Nikhil basically quit his job at a startup uh, and put his feet up. So initially, Nikhil worked with a MNC tech firm, and then over a period of time, he transitioned into this startup side. And now that he's done financially well, he seems to have saved up enough for retirement and all of that. There was really nothing more that he could ask for. What do you think happened to Nikhil after this point? Okay, from a financial perspective, his retirement is secure, his children are well settled, he doesn't have to work another day in his life, right? Given all of these things, do you think Nikhil is happy? You can just type yes or no in the chat. Isn't this what we all aim for? Okay, may not be. Why do you think he may not be happy? Yes, he has no liabilities, nothing outstanding. Happiness per your definition, right? If you were in his shoes, would you be happy at this stage? You have enough money for retirement. You don't have any liabilities. You don't have uh, anything that's pending. So no one thinks Nikhil is happy. Okay. All right. So let's look at what actually caused Nikhil's unhappiness, because uh, it's not just about this, right? So a year into retirement, Nikhil realized that he was actually quite unhappy, right? Because like somebody mentioned, he was anxious about his investments. He was not sure that, okay, like I have saved enough, it's a large sum, but will this last my whole life? Is my screen not visible? Right. So he was anxious about his investments because he wanted to protect them, like somebody correctly pointed out. And the best way he could think of protecting it was to lock it up in a fixed deposit. From the FD, he was earning some sort of monthly income, right? Uh, to meet his lifestyle needs, because he had completely put his feet up, he had cut back on some expenses, right? But also at this point, he was used to a wealth creation journey where his wealth was continuously growing. And this was no longer happening for him because most of his investments were locked up in a low growth asset. And whatever growth he was getting from that asset also was going towards his expenses. So he started to get a little bit worried about what he needed to do next in life, right? What was it that would have given him some level of happiness, uh, or some level of contentment in the way his wealth creation journey was going? So he realized that a large part of his wealth actually came from the last part of his career when he was working in a startup, because the startup gave him a really good settlement, and he had some ESOPs and all of that. So he thought that, okay, now maybe if I invest in startups and unlisted companies, I could very likely make the kind of wealth that I wanted to do before I retired. And like a lot of you pointed out, Nikhil was now bored, right? There was a point in his life where he would go to office. Now his children were also not living at home. So there was nothing really for him to do. And because he was bored, he was trying to see if he could get some thrill out of doing something with his investments. So what actually went wrong in Nikhil's journey? And if we look at this, it's basically boiling down to one thing, right? He did not have enough strategic planning. He did not know what his big picture vision was, right? A lot of us think that we want to retire at 45 or we want to retire at 50 and we want to take life easily, right? But if we don't prepare for that, do you really want to retire and do nothing? Or is it that you want to retire so that you don't have to do what you're doing as a career right now? A lot of us imagine a second career that could be fulfilling an entrepreneurial dream. It could be volunteering. It could be just spending some time with family, traveling the world. But there needs to be some vision of what you want to do. We cannot replace activity with inactivity, right? That eventually leads to unhappiness. So you need to have a strategic plan as to, okay, if I'm going to stop something, what is going to fill that space, right? And when you talk about strategic planning, what you actually mean is that you need discipline and you need to have this vision. It's good to have this vision and say that, okay, like, when I'm 50, I want to travel the world and I want to go and see 100 different countries and I want to have these experiences, and all of that is great. But what you really need is the discipline to make it happen, right? It's not just going to happen on its own. And that means doing things when you don't really feel like doing them, which means saving when you don't really feel like saving, which means paying attention to your finances when the market is not being very helpful. It means looking at rebalancing your assets. It means saying that, okay, like I made this plan, some of my assumptions didn't work out the way that I wanted them to. So let me now put in some more work. Or it could even be the other way, where you've made this plan, you were very conservative with your assumptions, you're doing much better than you expected. Then most of us tend to fall into this trap where we think that, okay, I'm ahead of the curve, so I don't really need to do much anymore. And then we take our foot off the pedal. And then you'll realize before you know it that you're actually behind and not ahead anymore, right? So strategic planning actually allows us to maintain that focus on what our big picture target is. It allows us to measure our discipline, right? Like, am I being disciplined with my financial goals? Am I being disciplined with my assets, right? Am I coming back and doing the things that I'm supposed to do? They may be boring, they may be tedious, but they need to get done, because if you look at any story of success, discipline is such a big element in that recipe, right? Without discipline, you cannot have big picture vision, you cannot have success, or you can have the vision, but you may not realize it, right? And that's actually a tragedy, because again, that comes back to what is our most powerful asset, right? You are your most powerful asset. So if you have a vision, uh, the idea is that you should be able to make it happen, and you can only make it happen through discipline. So this is what tends to happen when your assets are much more than your liabilities, right? So we talked about the situation where your assets are still catching up with your liabilities, but when your assets are much more than what your liabilities are, then we have this tendency to become complacent and take our foot off the pedal and kind of think that, okay, like, I don't need to do so much because I'm already where I need to be. Then, like Nikhil, we can become risk averse because we no longer want to uh, risk our capital, right? In the sense that he locked up all of his money in FDs because he felt that I need to make sure that this retirement corpus is there with me through my whole life. And then, just like Nikhil, you can go from being risk averse to misallocating capital, right? So on one hand, he wanted the FDs. On the other hand, because he was missing the kind of wealth creation that was happening for him through his career, he started looking at very high risk avenues that he didn't really fully understand, right? And we lose direction. So what is it that we want, right? You need to always have a target. You need to always have a direction, and we need to make sure that slowly but surely we are getting to where we want to get. And once we cross each milestone, we need to start visualizing what the road from there is going to be. And this isn't just about, having more money, because wealth is much more than just money. And I'm sure all of y'all would agree with me, right? And when you lose direction, you forget to stretch. And stretching is the most important part of your journey, because only then can you actually unleash your full potential. When you stretch, you're trying to do something more than you imagine you can do today. And it's always possible to do more, right? And if we're going to be ambitious, we need to be disciplined. And if we don't stretch, then what happens is you lose potential. And that big picture vision that you had is just going to deflate like a balloon. And you don't want that to happen because it's entirely in your control to make it happen. So just like everything else, if your target and your assets are very close to each other, there's really no room for growth. There's no room for imagination. There's no room for you to stretch and achieve something. And we need to think of our targets as little seeds. And seeds need space to grow, right? If you compress them on all sides and don't give them soil and air to breathe, they're not going to be able to grow into plants, and they're not going to be able to become trees, and they're not going to be able to fruit. So just like how you have a vision of where you want to be, if you keep lowballing it, right, and if you keep saying that I'll do just what I think I'm capable of and nothing more, then you're not going to see that kind of expansion that can happen for you. And that's a really beautiful journey for you to experience. So that being said, I think we need to look at how we can turn our good fortune to advantage. So if you're in a situation where your assets are very close to your targets, right, then you're actually very fortunate. So how do we make the most of that situation instead of becoming complacent? And when we look at that, I think the first thing is that you can expand your risk appetite, because this is actually the time that you can afford it. So many people in Nikhil's shoes would reach this situation where they feel that, okay, I'm so close to my target. I don't think I should really take any risk because I just want to get to my 100% and stop there, right? But the truth is, this is the only point in your journey where you can afford to take more risk. You can afford to expand your risk appetite, and you can do more with your assets, right? And risk does not mean that you have to seek the most exotic investments. It means that you need to allocate wisely so that you can stretch your investment horizon, not necessarily moving into a different set of assets that, like in Nikhil's case, looking at unlisted companies or startups instead of focusing on what worked for him before, right? Which was mutual funds and stocks and things like that. So the second thing that we can do is to keep the fire burning, right, with another milestone. So when we cross one milestone, we need to really start thinking about what the next milestone is going to look like and what the path to that next milestone is. Unless we have that vision, we aren't going to find the motivation or maintain the discipline to make it happen. And these are the two things that we really need to be successful. The third thing that we need to do is to not lose track of what worked. So, like I mentioned in Nikhil's case, he had been a regular investor in mutual funds. He had some blue chip companies in his portfolio. And this is what had worked for him in getting to his retirement corpus, as well as a combination of FDs. But now he completely lost track of what worked for him. He switched fully into FDs and he started looking at startups because of the one-time settlement he had from working there, right? So one thing is that we need to understand that what works tends to work for a long time. And we don't need to try something new just because we are dreaming bigger. Dreaming bigger has nothing to do with trying something exotic, right? The simple things work very well for wealth creation. So the last thing is that we need to remember that money is a tool. And if we look at wealth, it's not just about money, it's about a feeling, it's about a certain level of comfort, it's an ability to give back to society, it's an ability to create a better space for everyone around you, right? So money is only a tool, and we need to learn how to use that tool effectively. But wealth creation is a process that we need to follow throughout our lives. And wealth creation does not stop, right? You can stop earning money at some point when you stop working, but you can't stop creating wealth. Whether even through your retirement, there is a way to create wealth, even through your working years, you are creating wealth continuously. So that's a process that we have to sort of work towards continuously. And this brings me to the end of my presentation, after which we can open up for questions, we can open up for conversation, and I'm happy to talk to you about anything that you would like to discuss on financial planning, on having a vision, on setting goals. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Marcus Aurelius, where it says, "A man's worth is no greater than his ambitions." Right? So, what we dream and what we want is our value, and you are your biggest asset. And the way to harness your biggest asset is to have vision, is to have discipline, and is to have a strategic financial plan. So I'm just going to leave our contact details here for everyone to see. And if you have any questions, you can please type them into the chat box and I'll be happy to take them. Okay, so we have a question from Mr. Dilip, which is how to set financial wealth vision and mission for the family. I think there are a few ways in which we can do this. The first is that you sit down with your family and you talk to them about what is most important for them, right? Each person in the family will actually have a different idea of what is important, might have different priorities. So once you do that and you get a sense of, okay, my daughter wants this, my son wants this, my wife wants this, my parents need this through their life, then you know that, okay, these are all things that we have to work towards together as a family, right? Then you can see who is going to contribute what. You can sit down with a financial planner and even map your assets, right? So this is one manner in which you can do it. The second is, let's say you don't have that kind of participation from everyone. You can decide. So we have a program called Milestones to Wealth, where we help investors start from wherever they are to reach their first crore in savings. So similar to that program, you can decide that, okay, today I am at X wealth. As a family, I would like to see our wealth grow from X to 5X, right? And then that becomes the milestone, or that becomes the benchmark in which you're going to set and you're going to work towards. So that's the second way of doing this. How to get more wealth generation in a single asset class. So each asset class actually has cycles, right? Whether you're talking about stocks, whether you're talking about bonds, whether you're talking about gold. So if you want to focus your entire energy on one asset class, then you need to understand that cycle extremely well. You need, and it will probably, unfortunately, take you 1 or 2 cycles to get that timing right. And what happens is if you're going to focus on one asset class, the bulk of your wealth creation will happen later in life. So you have to stick to that process. You need to have that discipline to follow through with all of your learnings. And it's always best to have a mentor. And just in terms of looking at single asset classes, it's from a growth perspective and from a long-term perspective, equity might be the thing that works best. Because if you take fixed income, maybe in one cycle you can make 9 to 10%, like in a good part of the cycle, but the rest of the time you're going to be making somewhere between 5 to 7%, right? And if you want to compound wealth over a longer period of time at a high rate, you need to be aiming at least for 12% or higher. Okay, so we have another question from Mr. Madan Raj. What if the persona you introduced is not yet done, has debts, but needs to travel another 20 years of professional life? How do we plan in that situation? Right? So this is where actual financial planning can make a world of a difference, right? If you have debts in your 50s, you've not planned your retirement corpus very well, you still need to work, right? Then what is the way forward? Right? This is where prioritization and deciding where your assets and your energy goes makes a huge difference. So you need to actually sit down with a financial planner. You need to put pen to paper, and you need to actually see, okay, if this is how much I need to retire, how much can I cut back on my expenses today? And if I cut back on my expenses, how much can I pay off my loan? And if I'm able to prepay my loan, how many years do I free up in my career to again save for wealth creation, or that I can shave off from my career, right? So there are a lot of interacting elements. That is, it covers, like, you need to start with budgeting, you need to start with uh, whether there is some level of career security or not. You need to look at what are the debts, right? Now, let's say if the house is the debt and you have a home loan, is it possible for you to sell the house, settle the loan, and move somewhere else, right? That is one option. Whether it makes sense. In each case, I'm just giving you different solutions, but in each case, it will actually be more personalized, right? In one case, it may not be possible to sell the house and move. In another case, that might be a solution. Uh, the second thing is, if it's your children's education loans, is that something that they can also share responsibility with? The third is, like, sometimes what we see is parents who are already so constrained with many things will also feel the need to spend on their children's weddings, right? Which is actually going to eat into their retirement and their mental peace. And you'll also notice that mostly in this generation, parents are not expecting the children to financially support them. So if all the financial burden is on one generation, then we need to see what is the priority, right? If you want to be self-sufficient and you want to provide all of these things for your children, there is going to be some level of trade-off. So maybe you can decide to spend less on the wedding. So there are a lot of different options, and that has to be customized according to what your values are. Yes, we can guide in deployment of retirement benefits. We have worked with a lot of people who have approached retirement, who are already retired. We've helped them with restructuring their gratuity, understanding how much pension they will get, looking at their PF benefits. So all of this is something that we can help you with. I have left our number online on the screen. So please do message us, and maybe we can do a more detailed and specific plan for you. Connect sir, we have the number here. You can just drop us a message. If you ever need anything in the future, then we can sort of connect and then decide how to take it forward. This is a good question. What would be your equity, mutual fund, and fixed income asset allocation? Again, this is something that you'll have to do based on your personal goals, right? Let's say your only goal is retirement, you can have a much higher equity allocation than fixed income. If your biggest goal is your son or daughter's education in 2 to 3 years time, your biggest allocation simply cannot be equity, right? Especially if you're planning to send them abroad, and that kind of cost is much higher. So the asset allocation is not actually based on your age or your risk profile. It has to be customized according to your goals. Of course, age and risk profile will play a certain role. And if we remember, one of the things that we mentioned today was that if you're in a space where you can comfortably achieve your goals, right? Your assets are much more than your liabilities. You can again change your asset allocation to a slightly more aggressive allocation, right? You don't need to necessarily buy into like more exotic products like AIFs or unlisted shares or anything like that. You could just be maintain a very simple allocation, but slightly more aggressive in nature. I think, Gopi, can you share the YouTube link after the program is done? Or if it's live, can we share the YouTube link here? I think this is true. I think people have now gotten used to a higher rate of return simply because the last 5, 6 years in the market have been pretty good, right? So there is this recency bias in terms of what is a good return, right? Uh, so I think that is just human nature. You will see it in every cycle. If we look at, people who talked about multi-asset investing maybe 10 years ago, they only talked about stocks and bonds, right? If we look at people who talk about multi-asset investing today, they will talk about stocks, bonds, and gold. So I think our nature as humans is that we will look at what worked most recently, and then we kind of anchor to that, and then our narratives get framed around that. But it's important to be a good observer of how people behave in different markets, and to also maintain your own goal and standard, right? So maintaining your benchmark is very important in your own journey, because again, if you don't maintain that, then you can get very easily carried away by what other people are setting as the standard, and that may not actually work for you. Oh, this is a very interesting question, and I think I find it hard to answer without actually knowing your spouse. So, which asset class do you feel should have more allocation in the perspective of wealth creation for my spouse? I think one is, it's actually interesting because previously I used to think that women were very conservative investors and men were slightly more aggressive, but I have actually seen the opposite as well. So I think one is that it should be something that she understands. So if she understands mutual funds, then that should be the asset allocation. Most people understand fixed deposits, but the thing with fixed deposits is that they can become too comfortable, right? And then we reach that space where we're not stretching. So if that is the asset that she's most comfortable with, then there is some requirement to stretch. And this allocation actually should change with time. So if you're a first time equity investor, then you start small in equity. Maybe the interest that you're getting from your FD, you can channel as an SIP. But as you get more comfortable in 2 to 3 years time, that allocation should start increasing in line with your goals, of course. But that is basically how I would look at it. But it's very difficult for me to sort of judge what would be the best asset for her. Okay, so suppose I have 50 lakhs. Rather than investing in a lump sum, can I move this amount to debt funds to generate monthly income and then invest in SIPs? Is this a wise idea for safe investment? Is there any downside of this approach? So One is if you have lump sum, you can do something as STP, right? So that is you can put it in a debt fund and then you can gradually over a few months invest into equity markets. And that allows you to sort of um, participate through the volatility, not put all of your money in at one time. But if you're looking at debt mutual funds, then I think you don't get that monthly income, right? It's just some level of capital appreciation. And that's not like an FD in the sense it's not going to be 5% split across like 12 months. It's going to be different, right? Like it's based on market movements. So I think that would be the downside, that you won't get a regular income. And you can otherwise, if you want to put your FD, if you want to lock into an FD and then use that monthly investment to invest in equity mutual funds, maybe until you get confident, you should do that. But ideally you want to participate when the opportunity is there, right? So I think that would be the way I would approach it. Okay, breakup of my income: 40% savings, 40% expenses, 20% EMI. Is repaying debt by reducing savings a good idea? General thoughts. So when we do financial planning, we do this thing known as dynamic debt management, right? Which means that at different points in time, we have to evaluate whether it is better to pay off the debt or better to save in the market, right? So how can we look at this? If the market is very hot and things are very overvalued, then it 100% makes sense for you to pay off your debt, right? So let's say you can change your thing to maybe 30% savings and 10%, 30% paying off debt, right? Let's say the markets are actually down and there are a lot of opportunities to participate. You can maintain it at 20 or even reduce your EMI. I mean, if it's possible, come back to 15%, right? So this happens with your monthly savings also. You can do this. If you get one-time bonuses also, you can say maybe 30% I will use to pay off the debt and 70% I will invest, or 50-50. So that is basically a function of two things. One, where the interest rate is, and two, where your market is, right? Or whatever, wherever your investment opportunities are. When you see both of these together, then you can decide what is the ideal thing. But I would not encourage you, for example, to completely reduce your savings to maybe 10 or 15% and then repay your debt just so that you can finish it faster. Because what tends to happen when we do that is that we end up not having any liabilities, but we don't create any wealth also, right? Whereas in the approach that I'm talking about, you end up creating some level of wealth and you're gradually paying off the liabilities. Okay, also we see that most call asset allocation blah blah, but actually wherever everywhere is very high equity exposure of 75 to 80%. So where is balance here? Asset allocation, but simply equity heavy only, right? So much bias towards high equity only. I think you can always find products that are suiting you. And if you don't find a product that works, meaning if you feel that people have higher exposure to equity than you're comfortable with, you can always look at controlling your own asset allocation, right? So you can have, let's say, even within mutual funds, if you don't like the way a multi-asset fund is managed, you could look at having two or three schemes in equity that contribute maybe 30 to 50% of your weight in the portfolio. And then you can have maybe like a gold or a silver mutual fund in terms of precious metals. You can have a global mutual fund. You can have some level of fixed income as well, right? So that way you have better control over what is happening as opposed to outsourcing it to somebody. Because ultimately, what happens in asset allocation products is fund managers look at relative valuation across asset classes. And if they feel that predominantly, say, equity in many cases is undervalued, they can give it more weight. And what tends to happen also is that if equity grows as an asset class, right, that growth tends to be faster than, say, fixed income. So when the rebalancing happens, you would have to sell something. And if selling is only merit based, then you can have a skew for a while that the asset allocation is not actually lower on equity. So I think that is something that uh, you can address on your own. Uh, I have 10 lakhs. My son is studying 8th standard. Now the college fees is 30 lakhs. How much could I have to invest to get that college fee along with my retirement? I think this is maybe I would recommend like people who have specific goals. Like I don't have any calculators available here. But what I would recommend is like please drop us a message and you can meet with our planning team and they can actually help you calculate your goal requirements and give you a proper thing which give prioritizes both, right? So you can see if you prioritize education over retirement, where are your targets? If you prioritize retirement over education, what is the kind of loan that you would need to take? Those kind of things. Because this is not like it's not a math calculation. Because that I'm sure even if you search online, you will be able to find some calculator that allows you to do this. Thank you for all your kind words. Okay, so we have one more question. Now I'm 49. What are the asset allocation I can do and don't? There is nothing that you can't do. What I would suggest is that you need to benchmark to the actual retirement corpus, right? So how many crores do you need to be saved in retirement for you to lead a comfortable life? And then work towards that. I think one thing is you want to keep it as tax efficient as possible. And at the same time, you want to keep it in a range where you are comfortable to continue to invest, right? So that's the basic thing. Thank you, sir. Do we have any more questions? I think we have another 10 minutes time, so I'm happy to take more questions if required. Please, everyone who had specific goal-based questions, I would encourage you just note down our number. It's 9500027285 and drop a message on WhatsApp, and definitely someone from our team will get back to you and we can work together on helping you achieve your stretch goals as well as harnessing your most powerful asset. Okay. There is different numbers of if times or X times are expenses. So what is the average sum rule in general to follow for retirement? Uh, so one thing when it comes to retirement, like, I mean, we don't work with any of the thumb rules. We kind of do two things. We have we have certain things that we factor into calculating the corpus that's required. So things like life expectancy, inflation, these are some of the factors that go into that. And once we are able to generate a certain number, then we know that for so many years the corpus will sustain. But that's the theoretical side. On the practical side, we need to keep, we look at retirement corpuses in two buckets. One is your expense bucket and one is your growth bucket, right? So what tends to happen is the expense bucket keeps coming, the water in the expense bucket keeps coming down as you spend money over, say, 3 to 5 years. And then the growth bucket actually starts filling up and then you refill from the growth bucket into the expense bucket. So this is how we approach retirement. But there are, like you said, I think in the US, the very popular thing is like 4% of the corpus should be your annual expense. So you can, I mean, if you're comfortable doing that, you can go ahead. So on the financial planning side, we actually sit down with people. You can either get a wealth map or a full-fledged financial plan, depending on what your other service requirements are. So what these two things will cover is basically your goals. So how much do you need to save for each goal? Then you have things like how much insurance you need, right? So do you have the right life and health insurance policies? And if you do, then do you have the right level of cover as well? Then we help with a certain level of tax planning. So Should you be in the new regime? Should you be in the old regime? Are any of your assets particularly tax inefficient? Then how to make it more efficient? Then we look at overall asset allocation, and we also look at debt management. So if somebody has a loan or multiple loans, how do we pay that off so that we can focus our energies on achieving the financial goals that are there, right? Uh, so these are all the different elements that are there in the financial plan. Whether you do the full-fledged plan or the wealth map, these are things that our team will cover. So I would request you to get in touch with us if you are interested in that. I'm not sure about these thumb rules. Like I mentioned, like our approach is not like that, and we don't work with thumb rules. And honestly, to be very frank, like even for a retired person, right, you can't just set a retirement corpus target and leave it at that. You need to come back to the table every few years and rework it and see what can be done, what can't be done. And we need to also be very practical about this. When you start out retirement, you might be in much better health. You might be able to travel, you might indulge in more activities and all of that. So your expenses can be higher. But then if you have a medical setback or an age-related issue that crops up, say 15, 20 years into retirement, then your expense profile is going to change and you might have to spend more on medical care and caregiving and those kind of things as opposed to leisure, right? So there is a need to not be set in your way that, okay, like I will only do X times my, like if my corpus is 1 crore, then I will only do 4 lakhs or 5 lakhs of expenses every year, right? Um, Okay, so I am investing in short-term debt mutual funds to get better returns compared to an FD. Is this the right way of investing? Idea is to move to equity when the market corrects. Yes, I think if the idea is to move to equity when the market corrects, that's the best way to approach it, because essentially you have that flexibility to move into equity very easily without paying any penalty. Whereas if you are trying to do in an FD directly, you would either lose the interest or there would be some kind of penalty on the day that you decide to switch. I am doing 50-50 in MF and equity on SIP. I need money after 4 years. When do I need to start selling? I think you need to start looking at it from next year itself. So 3 years to your goal, if there is already some asset that has performed, you need to start rebalancing. But ideally, most of the bulk of the rebalancing can happen uh, in year like 2 years from now and 1 year from now. But you should be fully, that goal should be fully funded by the time, like let's say 3 years from now itself. Where to park the profits booked in this overvalued market until we find the value again? If debt funds, what all the factors to check in debt funds? Okay, yeah, debt is a great place to park. You can also, I think sometimes you can even look at arbitrage. Main things you need to check are quality of the portfolio. Uh, that is, you want to be in high quality investments because you are looking to switch, right? You also want to be in low maturity products. That is, you don't want to be in a 10-year fund or a 20-year fund. You want to be in a shorter term fund, let's say a few months or 1 year at best. The third thing that you should check is basically the exit load, right? Because none of us know where the market is going to go. And let's say you need the money next week, and if you have to pay an exit load on that product, it doesn't really make sense for you. So if you're looking at exit load based products, then you need to make sure at least some are without an exit load and some are there. Do you handle NPS? What's your take on NPS management? How much of a compass is tax free once we hit 60 years? Okay, we don't handle NPS, but NPS is a really good product for you to consider for retirement, primarily because you get some kind of tax benefit now, and it's partly tax efficient later as well. I think you have to commute at least 40% into an annuity or something like that, and 40% is tax-free withdrawal, and 20% you have to pay tax. I think that's the split up, right? Yes, definitely. If you have a larger profit, right? We also need to understand that at some point SIPs become uh, lump sum portfolios. So we need to start treating them like lump sum portfolios after some time, especially if you've been an investor for 3, 4 years and you might have started with a 10,000 SIP. Now that will be worth something in lakhs, right? So that is a lump sum. And you do need to partially profit book. So that is a good idea. But again, depending on your theme, right? Like depending on what fund you've taken, if there is a need to exit or not, is a more fund level call. Okay. All right. I think I've answered all of the questions that have come in. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for celebrating I Thought Investor Day with us. Please do spend some time celebrating your achievements as well as thinking about what are the stretch targets you would like to set for yourself and your goals. Uh, I really enjoyed having this conversation and talking to people about each of their requirements and their questions. So thank you once again for making my day. And if you do need to get in touch with us for anything, the contact details are here. You can message us on WhatsApp at 9500027285, and our team will be very happy to work with you. Thank you very much.